Will Thomas is a veteran of user experience and product design, with over 2 decades of experience transforming teams and creating impactful solutions. In this episode, he dives into the challenges of building strong cultures, managing rapid growth, and navigating the disruptive rise of AI in design. Will shares powerful lessons on leadership, adaptability, and staying ahead in a constantly evolving industry. For anyone looking to lead, innovate, and thrive in the future of design, this is an episode you can't afford to miss. Enjoy.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Interface. This week we are joined by Will Thomas. Will, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Thank you
Brilliant.
very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, great to have you on, Will. And before we start, I just want to remind everyone, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn if you haven't already. So Will, you've worked in a few different industries. You've kind of been around the block quite a lot, right? So great to hear a bit about your background for those that haven't met you before, heard of you. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I've kind of been in user experience design, product design, however it's evolved over time for best part of 20 years now. Before it was user experience design, when I joined first company that really was in this area, it was kind of user-centered design. I think the job title was design lead and information architect. And that was, that first company I worked for, a company called Edward Jones, that was a kind of financial advisors. They were the company that really got me into UX at the outset of my career. I'd been reading about Jakob Nielsen and usability, and been looking for a company that kind of got this, and there were very few about in those days, talking about early 2000, 2003, 2004. And I found this company and worked there for 6 years. And, it was a brilliant education in user experience, user-centered design, because they're the company that I've probably worked with the most in my career, where they had the highest standard of UX maturity. The business really bought into this, and this is because of a lot of what had been done to develop the design department. And they had specialists in information architecture. My boss was the global information architect head, interaction design, interface design, user research and testing, and that was all in the US. They had their own testing labs on site in their head offices. So everything went through a very rigorous process in terms of user-centered design there. And I was based in their London office in Canary Wharf, which was relatively new. And consequently, because there was only one of me over in the UK compared with the kind of groups over in the US, I had to learn and do everything. And I had a great colleague alongside me, but we had to learn to do all these different disciplines, and got coached and mentored by all these specialists who've been doing this for many years. So that was a brilliant kind of introduction into user experience design. Had 6 years, great years there, working at a Canary Wharf in London, before moving on to work for larger scale corporate, Centrica, British Gas for a couple of years, and then a number of agencies, consultancies, a little bit on the government side, working for the NHS, before going for my first kind of leadership role back about 10, 11 years ago in an agency, building a design group up there, introducing clients, the whole concept of user experience, building it into the organization, and building and scaling a team to match some of the projects we were starting to win. And then moving on to a product company, Cheap Flights Momondo, designing a product from the ground up to compete in that kind of space of where Kayak and Skyscanner existed. After they're moving into e-commerce at made.com, which is really interesting challenge, redefining their whole e-commerce platforms across their various European sites, and then consultancy for quite a few large-scale investment banks for the consultancy I was working for. So a lot of complex trading applications and those kind of things. Before my most recent work was again back on the agency side for a while for a company called Infinum, running their design, research, and product strategy department, which is scaled up to about 30, 35 people. So that's 20 years of user experience spread across quite a diverse set of, as you say, industries and experiences. So yeah,
that's a tremendous amount of experience, and the number of industries covered is quite impressive, to be honest. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, out of all of the experiences that you've had, what would you say the one that gave you the? I think I know the answers, but which one is going to be like the one that gave you the biggest amount of kind of professional growth, or the biggest impact on your career, do you think?
That's a difficult one to say because, going back to what I said earlier, the formative experience at Edward Jones, it was 6 years. It was a really mature design process. You got to practice it and implement it and get coached by people. There's no doubt about it. In terms of skill set as an individual contributor, that was probably the biggest area of growth. And that tends to be the reality of in careers. You get the biggest exponential growth in the early part of your career. But in terms of it's difficult. I mean, the time at Cheap Flight's Momondo, it was building a product from the ground up, building a team to support that. I just built a team at an agency, but it was that was more chaotic and building and reacting. So I think there's also something to be said for that. Building a product from nothing and moving into a fairly competitive space and seeing it grow and succeed, there's a lot to that as well. So I might point to that as a formative. Plus, of course, it happens to be where I also came across Jay for the first time. So there's that to be definitely be said for it.
I hope that was a positive.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah, that is so. I guess, like, which was your kind of favorite industry that you've kind of worked across? And and when I say favorite, and like, I'm talking more so in terms of challenge, right? Because like you've worked across e-commerce, you've worked in consulting, you've worked like in like fintech, finance. So like, which one was the one that was like really, you found it extremely difficult, but at the same time you learned so much you could just apply it elsewhere, or help you in your career?
That's also good. I think working with some of the projects on the investment banking side was particularly challenging. The complexity, trying to get into heads of by speaking with traders about dark pool equity trading. It's a pretty obscure niche area that the reality is there's not a lot written about it, I think, in general or understood about it. So I think some of those technical, I did things on currency trading that helps support funds hedge against their daily operations to if they're operating in different currencies, those kind of things. That's fairly nuanced. But I mean, one of the things I think working across lots of industries give you is that kind of if you enjoy, and I think most UX product people are like this. You like to investigate things. You like to understand things. It's one of the challenges. It's not just the design itself. It's designed against the context of a particular area. And so, whilst I'd say, that the finance side I find interesting. Personal finance, I've had a long-term interest in investing. That partly that's come from my time at Edward Jones and these other things. But I think it's the diversity of stuff is actually what I've enjoyed across the career, as opposed to necessarily, and it's probably why I've never wanted to necessarily long-term specialize. I'm seeing more and more people kind of start out in one space, and particularly the expectations of the market sometimes that there's less imagination these days that you can transfer from one space to another. And if there's one thing where, if you've got research background and then you can learn pretty quickly. And you have to, if you've also worked in the consultancy space, you have to be able to get in, ask smart questions, really get to the nub of things, and bring yourself up to speed pretty quickly. So, um, you know, moving from one industry to the other is not the challenge that I think a lot of people think it can be.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I like that point there about the diversity of like where you work, because I do agree with you. I think it is important as a designer to kind of get new aspects, learn new things, and then that kind of just builds your repertoire over the years, right? But there is that thinking, right, that I should be in the same industry, or should my experience in that industry is going to help me get that next role. Do you think that's more
Yeah,
of a myth nowadays, or do you think it is actually like, has it hindered you in the past when trying to move into a new industry?
it's difficult to, that's a really good question because it's difficult to know the answer because 9 times out of 10, if you don't get a job, you don't find out why you don't get a job, or probably far more than 9 times out of 10, to be honest. So it's difficult to know why you're being rejected, why you might be being rejected for a role. I don't think I've had that feedback personally, as to my recollection across my career, but I'm sure it's become and I think, as in the current market when there's a lot of people available relative to the number of positions, I'm sure companies are being much more, we want this very specific experience, and ideally, can we get them from our direct competitors and they can come and do what they've done for them here, and that's who we want. And until we get that, that's we're not really hiring. So I'm sure there's a mentality of that. I I suspect it is the case, but I'd hope it wasn't. If that's the best way to describe it. Certainly, when I've been hiring for other people. It's not something that disqualifies them if they jump from role to from industry to industry. I think this, as you say, you get valuable perspectives from all these different places that you can reapply in different ways in whichever industry you're working in at the time.
You've been part of the hiring process like many times, right? And you've built teams from
Yeah,
scratch. You've joined teams and helped build them further.
yeah.
And going back to kind of Warren's point, do you do you believe that there's value like hiring people like with the experience in that industry, or do you feel as though it's better to bring in like fresh perspectives that have worked in completely different industries?
I think if this is kind of the research thing. I think, what do you think versus what you actually did?
Mm.
So, I think if I'm looking back at my hiring throughout, where they've worked previously has not necessarily been one of the highest influences in the decision. If you know what I mean. I certainly, you know, I've probably not drawn too much to, oh, they've worked for this particular company, this big name company, because tend to be the bigger name companies, or sometimes it's the projects you've worked on at those companies that are important. How much scale, impact did you deliver, and what the scale of the projects that you're working on. So certain companies you're going to, it's got a name, but you might be very limited in what you can do there. So no, I mean, I think thinking back to all the people I've hired, it's had a relatively small impact. It has been, have they worked in a very specific industry? And bear in mind also, I've hired across agencies where you've got a diverse set of clients either as well. So unless you're hiring someone very specifically for a very specific project for a very specific period of time, which may be more a contractor base, then that might be a thing. But more permanent roles where they might need to flip across clients and client areas, it's less important. As I say, the willingness to learn and the attitude and the general experience in the field is the thing that tends to win the day, if you like.
Yeah, and Will, I can feel that, based on what you're saying, I feel like you have a, rich experience in hiring and building great teams, and one thing that comes up quite a lot lately,
Mm.
definitely in the industry, is around culture. Um, this is something that it's such a difficult one to pin, right? And
Yeah.
or why does it get bad, or why does it not work, or how can we build better cultures in teams?
Yeah.
What are your opinions on building great cultures, and what successes have you seen in the past building great teams?
So, as I say, culture means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I mean, one of the things I remember hearing a year or two ago, and I really like this kind of definition to a certain extent of it, is like your culture is all the actions you've taken on a rolling 50-day working on basis. So, what at the last 50 days, how do the people in your company act? What did they do? What were their behaviors? And I kind of like that because certain companies, you kind of think, oh, maybe it's a static culture, it doesn't change. But actually, circumstances outside the company change, dynamics within the company change, and how do people react to that? And there's much more reality to a rolling kind of culture of evolving. And a company that might consider itself as a good culture in good times may really find out that it's challenged quite significantly when times outside the firm become challenging or circumstances become challenging. So, I, in terms of driving culture, you've often got the values of the firm from the highest level, but they tend to be relatively abstract, and they tend to be somewhat generic. You'll see a lot of four names or four key things, and they're derivatives of a lot of other companies with four key things. So but I think in terms of building a culture, especially within the design and research area, it's encouraging the right kind of behaviors, and it's to a certain extent setting expectations by how you act, because a lot of culture is about how people behave and act, and do they hold themselves accountable? Are they going to try and get the work done? Do they challenge appropriately? So it's and your initial hires are crucially important. I've counted myself. I've been very lucky. I've managed to hire some truly exceptional people. I'm not going to embarrass Jay, but yeah, he's definitely among them. But it is a temptation to pick the first people you come across. And I remember when hiring, in this case, it was one of the roles that Jay came to, and I had the opportunity to hire him. We went through a recruiting process, and there were some very good people, but they weren't right. And for where we were at the circumstance, and in the end, I went back and started the process, worked with an external recruiter who I built a really good relationship with, really trusted, and we got into people. And I got in Jay. I was very fortunate to get in Jay and a gentleman called Mike at the same time, and it was almost like getting a pairing. And I think that's something I learned to try and apply later. It's sometimes you get, it's the nature of it. You're building a team. You get one hire in a budget now, and then you get another hire potentially in 3-4 months. And what we ended up doing there was bringing forward one and bringing back the other one, so that effectively I could hire as a pair. One, it minimized the going through the process twice. I was basically looking for two, but it was also two people that I think could bounce off each other, but had quite diverse backgrounds, experiences, and what have you to fill those gaps. And as I say, I think Jay, we're both still very good friends with Mike, and it's something that I think we worked as a really close unit in the first, building that and driving that team forward. That was there, and we added to it later, but. That getting the right pairing, setting the behaviors, setting the expectations, being open about what the situation is, I think is really important as well. Is if what's the right word? Kind of transparency, not to the point of recklessness, but being open and honest with people about what situations are, and to a certain extent trusting that they can handle it and make the best of the situation. And I can speak to with my hiring with Jay here that he became my diplomat. He was difficult situations, put Jay in, and suddenly the waves smoothed, and lots of people came back. Oh, Jay's fantastic, isn't he? Sorry, I'm embarrassing him.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn the camera off in a second. No, but I just on that point though, like just on reflection, because I remember that time very vividly, and I remember you built out that team from scratch, and you did hire me and Mike at the same time, and ultimately, exactly as you said, like we couldn't be any more different, like myself and Mike, in terms of like backgrounds, age, like we were literally on like opposite ends of the spectrum in like every way, but it just seemed to work as a team. Like you said, you needed my skills in certain situations, but at that point in time, like if you needed to push certain things or innovate and really kind of push boundaries, you needed Mike in those situations. So
Mike
that was
opened,
a really good balance,
well.
and I think we managed to kind of break kind of new grounds in the travel space at that time as well, which is
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. No, that's it. I mean, pairing is something that I've read a little bit more about subsequently, but it seems to work as as you're building, getting those psychological and dynamics set, and as you say, you can people from different backgrounds, different experiences can still really work well together, and it's that's the key, less of where they come from. But yeah, I mean, you also got a degree of luck, but I've been, in that sense, I've been a lucky leader down the years.
I think that's fantastic. And like one thing I also want to kind of just add in as well, because I think that topic of transparency within team cultures and kind of building them, I think is kind of essential. I think that time kind of cheap flights in Mamondo, there was a ton of transparency there, especially between our team. And I think in company that I'm in now, there's a ton of transparency. There's a lot of trust, and I think these are the only two places that I've really kind of seen that so kind of strongly. And I do feel like you kind of create stronger bonds, kind of because of that. So it's definitely something that I'm a believer in, and anything that any company I'd join, in the future or kind of whatever endeavors I'm on, that's definitely going to be in the forefront of my mind. But like, how do you, I guess, kind of keep that kind of closeness within a team, right? So I know that you initially you hire these people because of these specific qualities, but then how do you keep them together as one, rather than each individual seeing themselves as a superstar or unique contributor? How do you keep that essence of team and move ego from the equation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, I say, part of it is in who you select in the first place, and there's a lot of things that are patterns of behaviors that you want to see, but there's also anti-patterns that you try and avoid, and that kind of strong egocentric one, you're trying to detect that coming through in interviews, and that's not who you want. There's it's a really good Simon Sinek piece about how they recruit Marines and who they go for, and the star person who's egocentric or doesn't, is not well respected across the team. You don't want them. However good a performer they are, you don't want that person. You're better off with someone who is not necessarily, and often, as I say, they are star performers. They just don't see themselves as star performers. You want that person, and but who's got the really great attitude of working collaboratively, and is happy to ask questions. I mean, the other thing is it's kind of, how do you get the closeness? You try to create a sense of, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay, and it's expected for you to draw upon the expertise of others, and that's not looked down upon. It's actually rewarded. Being willing to be able to create an environment whereby anyone can say, yeah, I don't get that. Can anyone help me? And draw. You are it's a team. It's a team, and it's I played on sports teams as younger, and a lot of football. And the reality is, you have different skill sets in different positions, and not everyone does every bit superbly well. That's just not going to happen. It's not the definition. We're not, we've got shapes to us in terms of skills, experiences, and what have you, and being able to reward people for how they contribute to the team by how they share information, but how they ask for it as well. Ask for it as well is, I think, it's a big thing. And if you're going to set up competitiveness in a thing, make sure it's a relatively friendly competitiveness. Personally, I mean, I think that I've seen examples of like where you said leaders want to pitch people against each other to see who will come out on top and what have you. And it's an approach, and I think it probably can work, but it's just not how I would tend to work. So yeah, if it's friendly, if it's competitive nature, and I remember setting up an AB MVT kind of thing with you and Mike with a big board, who in Cheap Flights Momondo competing, but then it was a brilliantly competitive, well-natured competitiveness. There was no kind of, if you get this, your bonus is linked to it or what have you. And then the other things is little things like dynamics. I think, we used to go out to lunch, not necessarily all together every day. We'd go out at the same time. We'd often go out into the street, we'd get our thing, and we'd come back and we'd eat together as well. So it's not, again, it depends on the environment you're in, how possible it is. It depends. You don't want to force people to do this, but as I say, I've been lucky in a lot of places whereby, if you can do these little things, it can, you're all working for the same goals at the end of the day, and how you help others in the team is a big thing of how I would see how you're performing.
So like this is like really, really good in terms of understanding what creates a strong team kind of culture. But like, have you ever personally experienced, or maybe secondhand, seen it go wrong? See poor cultures and wonder like what the hell happened, or like why things like this. I guess they call it toxic cultures, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen aspects of it personally in places at times. It's more, but I've heard it mainly from you have friendships outside of your work. Some work in UX, some work in other fields, and they tell you about behaviors or what's going on in company, and it's this, you can you could go, oh, okay, this is not good, this is what's happening, this, so it's more secondhand I've experienced at times. And again, it's difficult to say toxic cultures, because it almost implies it runs through the body of the entire organization, and often that's not the case. There's toxic pockets, if you like. Now, that what you could argue is, if a culture is strong, you should be able to identify toxic pockets quickly, and it should be dealt with effectively. So you could argue that's a sign of weaker culture in that, because a toxic pocket, for whatever a better term, can only arise really because people don't feel empowered to be able to speak up enough about it, or if they do speak up about it, the powers that be, whatever it is, don't do enough to make sure it stops, and address the situation. So, I think rather than a toxic culture, I've seen in smaller things. Toxic culture throughout the firm, maybe one or two examples, but it's also the thing true about cultures being affected by things on the outside. And I remember one organization I worked for as a client, so I can't name them, but it was around about the time COVID happened, and I don't know how, I wasn't there too long before COVID happened to know whether the behaviors changed a lot, but some of the things that I witnessed, where around COVID, when you weren't being able to meet people face to face, also you go remote and actually be cameras off often. That was a very strange thing when you'd be on a meeting with 10 people and you'd be the only one with your camera on. And you'd work alongside people for 2-3 months and you don't know what they look like after 3 months. That was, that there were aspects there that, it was a tricky project, but there were things in the both on the client side and our side that could have been done better, differently, but you don't know how much is attributable to, that strange time we went through right at the beginning before we got used to things.
And Will, you mentioned there around, sometimes it can be pockets of things that kind of upset the culture. And, I think back to an example that I witnessed recently in another organization where we had a strong culture. Like, it was a good team ethic, but then we hired a couple of additional people and it kind of upset the balance. And then made that culture look different. I guess that's what we're talking about when we talk about like pockets of things upsetting things or disrupting the culture. Have you ever had to deal with a situation where your culture has been disrupted? And how have you kind of, for anyone listening, like how would you manage and deal with something like that and kind of rebalance it again?
I think if I think about it that way, there's not been too many, I would say, situations. I can't think of where I've hired someone that's come in and it's definitely some, hired someone who's come in and how they've, in one occasion I can think of how they presented themselves in interview, and literally on day one it was like a different person. But that was someone not fitting, and they tried a few things and it clearly didn't work, and they moved on. But I think right at the outset of my career, before Edward Jones even, this is kind of working on web stuff, but before it was what I would call user experience thing. And we acquired a company, or I think we sold off a company that was a sister company or thing, and we acquired two people who kind of worked in similar roles, but not really. And they just suddenly, it was a small team of 2 or 3 of us, and then we had 2 new people, and they were basically dropped on us. And I think there was a lot of ill feeling that they brought with them from what the company they'd been with has been through a struggle. The manager was relatively inexperienced. He didn't know how to really deal with it. I was a very different person from the people who were brought in. And I think that was one that really didn't end well. And, within, I think I was there for a year and a bit before they came in. Within 3 months, I was like, I'm out of here. So very, very reasonably happy to this is not working, and in 3 months, and it can be very disruptive. But that was a situation that was not handled well, if you like. But that's the only one I can really think of off the top of my head where you've had someone come in and really upset the apple cart inside. That's been my experience, really. And for 10 years I've been building the team. So you're really, again, you're looking to make sure you don't hire those kind of people that will disrupt in the wrong way.
How do you feel things could have been handled better? What was missed? What should have been done that wasn't? I'm just kind of thinking, like, if this was to happen again, and the disruptive force entered the team, what's the best thing to do?
So you've got to bear with me. That I'm looking back at 20 plus years here in terms of memory. It was pretty traumatic at the time because it was like one of my first proper job, if you like. But I think if I put my leadership hat on with 20 years experience and applied there, one, the manager at the time didn't have a great deal of experience leading. He was leading one/two people, or what have you. Suddenly his team changed overnight with two extra people coming in, and two people who had large chips on their shoulders, rightly or wrongly. Yeah, I think to a certain extent they had certain justification, but it manifested itself in the wrong way, in how they acted within the new environment they found themselves, if you like. I really think if I'd have, it's a very difficult situation. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not one that I would like to face myself. So there's no obvious, and to a certain degree, you're looking at this with hindsight. So it's a mistake that's been put upon you with people with the wrong kind of attitude for the reasons that are outside your control. Firstly, I think I'd probably try to, with those people, try to say, look, this is a fresh start for you. There's a slate clean. There's an opportunity here, and try to take out some of that poison that they felt from the previous situation in employment, because you get situations that justifiably you feel aggrieved at, but ultimately beyond a certain circumstance, the more you fester over it, the longer it's going to impact you negatively in your well-being. So I think probably if I was in that situation, I saw that those kind of behaviors, that's one of the first things I'd think about. I'd make sure, I think more, and this is probably one of the things I did learn about, you see, you learn from management all the time, hopefully from really good people who do it really well, but occasionally from bad examples, or situations that should have been handled differently. And I think setting expectations, stepping back from it and going, okay, we need a new plan. This is, you've gone from 2-3 people in a team to 5 people in a team almost overnight. The expectation, there wasn't a plan for these people in terms of how they would integrate, what they would do. And I don't think, I think that's the other thing, is setting expectations on behaviors and stuff like that, because those can, it's easier to set the expectation and then address concerns when you start to see stuff than it is to not say anything, find there's actions taken and attitudes or what have you, and then have conversations. And that's where culture is important, because culture can help you set that up in the first place, if you know what I mean. So part of the expectations can be verbalized between you and them, but part of it comes from can come from the culture.
Yeah, those are really good points. And that growth can drive a lot of change, like you said, right? When you start to, your team gets bigger, and we see it a lot, right? Because nowadays, I think we've seen such a big growth of organizations and teams so rapidly in the last few years, right? It used to be a bit more steady. Like, think of like an Amazon, obviously, they've been kind of growing over a long period of time, right? Whereas now you see a lot of these businesses just kind of scaling up rapidly. Like, I mean, Made.com's a great example, right? Well, I remember that was like that one just came out of nowhere, and a whole new kind of way of thinking. But have you been in, I know you've been in some startups and things like this, right? But you've had to grow. How do you handle like that growth, like rapid growth, and like, expanding teams and making sure that you're growing in the right way?
Yeah, it's not easy. And one of I remember a conversation I had with one of the leaders in the last company I worked with, and it's absolutely true. It is true. When I think back to the thing, is firms often hire at the point where a new person to the team, beyond the point where it's already breaking with the existing team. And the problem is, a lot of companies say, our people are the most important thing. The problem is then they go into a hiring process which takes people away from the work to do it properly, at least, to do the hiring properly, when they're already overstretched. So if you're not careful, the hiring process becomes a bit sketchy, a bit rushed, a bit piecemeal. And if you're not careful, you end up hiring out of desperation, and you get the wrong person in, and then you get the scenario. So you have to take real care over that. Try to get ahead of it. It's difficult to do. I think it was one of the agencies I worked where I first built a team. It was kind of, I think we were 1 to 9 people, 10 people, contractors. Sometimes it's a bit in out, but within like 9 months, 9 months, 10 months from introducing. That's one a month over the course, and it didn't all come in one per month. And you're winning a bit of business, you're needing someone to cover it, you're looking at hiring, and you've got notice periods to deal with, and those kind of things. In that company, you have a bit of control over hiring, so because you're a new department as well, you don't have existing processes. So it's getting the right personalities in that can do the job independently, but have that kind of maturity to be emotionally independent, and contribute to what you're building. And it's with that organization that we ended up building a department quite quickly, going pretty well, but then some of the structure changes in the business, they merged a couple of departments, and what you thought you were building, you're no longer building, and you decide this is not right for me, and you move on. And unfortunately, you see sometimes, what you carefully quite put together, quite with a lot of hard work and effort, because you generally in the leadership positions when you're doing that, you're putting in a lot of extra hours, but you're thinking, I'm putting this in to be able to get the reward of a really good built team 6 months, 12 months down the line, 2 years down the line, and you see it fritter away. That's pretty heartbreaking. But if it's not nurtured, you can't just hire someone and right, you get on with this project and disappear. You've got to kind of try and nurture the people as well, in the business, into the business. But it's not an easy thing. But it's trying to get ahead of it. It's really trying to devote the time to recruiting and getting the right people in, and not taking shortcuts. As I say, I could have cheap flights. I could have made a bad decision, and in hindsight, I got lucky. I made a decision, and I got someone like Jay in and Mike in, and that made everything grow from there very well. But yeah, I look back at my career, and I haven't made too many bad decisions hiring wise. Maybe 1 or 2 that I question, but that's about it. Which I think is a reasonable strike rate. But it's also about how you retain people afterwards, how you treat people, that they want to stay, they want to grow within your group. So hiring is one aspect, but it's not done then. You're not done then.
What about firing? So like you mentioned, like bringing the right people in. What about taking the right people out? Like, what's your? I don't know if you've done it, but like, what is your kind of point of view of that? Like when is the right time to do that?
I've been somewhat fortunate in that I don't think I've had to fire anyone directly as such. There's been occasions where people have been managed out of the business, which is a different process to a certain extent, because there you're seeing whether someone is, and often it's actually, sometimes it's not your decision. I've had situations where I've been asked to work with people. I've started to work with them, and I feel like they've grown, and then the business has decided, no, we're pulling the plug. And sometimes you're asked to have those conversations, but more often, if you've been an advocate for the person and you've seen them grow, and if people get a bit of coaching and they're receptive towards it, then you don't necessarily be the one to let them go. In fact, I think I've seen that a couple of times where I haven't necessarily felt that was the right course of action, and then someone senior has decided, no, we're pulling the plug, and it's becoming a senior decision. So I don't know how common that is, but I haven't had to deal with. I've had to work with people to improve their performance, and sometimes I've worked with people who have been uncertain as to whether they wanted to continue with the firm, whether it was the right thing for them, or what have you. And sometimes it's been the right thing, and we've managed to bring them back. Other times, you've asked the questions, you've worked with them, you've been honest, you've been open about the situation, and they decided to leave. And then you try and do the best for them you can outside of that. So you try and give them the feedback of wherever they're going to go next. What can they focus on to make sure this doesn't happen, or their perception is the perception of them is different.
Yeah, and you mentioned in that all about sometimes senior stakeholders or it's not always in your control, right? When you have to maybe make those decisions to remove people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk now about companies looking to see where they can make cuts to implement AI right into their processes, and there has been a lot of discussion around the design side of things as well, right? Because you got these tools that just spin up pages quite quickly, and you start to think, hey, do we need to have as many designers on our team? What's your opinion on that side of things, and do you think the role of design is in a little bit of jeopardy?
I think the role itself, I think, might end up evolving. I think there'll be greater expectation on how can we say the scope of work that a designer is expected to do, and I think there may be less work overall because of that. More designers can get through more websites, apps, or what have you in a shorter period of time. But I think there's also the challenge of, and it's been a long-term one for us in our industry, is the perception that other people can do our jobs pretty well. I as a stakeholder have got an opinion on how this should be. Now I don't need to engage a designer. I can just talk and get my thought that I've been thinking about for a long time spun up quite quickly. But the problem is with that is, do they have measures of whether this is actually making a difference or not? Is it just, where it helps will be people will be able to spin up ideas quickly, but will they be able to, how will they measure their effectiveness quickly? And I think that is going to be a longer term challenge, because I think there's certain aspects of the process that you can draw upon AI thinking with a design system and just pulling components to assemble pages and entire flows relatively autonomously, for want of a better term, but with some supervision, if you like. But is that going to cut across, how the role is seen? Yes, I can see it becoming a little bit. The visual analogy I would apply, a kind of a thing, is the Minority Report, the Tom Cruise. He's got those hand gestures and he's bringing stuff in, and no, that's not that. I can see design becoming a little bit more like that in a way, in that it's a prompting, seeing what the options are, making a decision on to keep something or reject something. And also I can see AI being a very useful checking tool to go, here's a list of parameters that we or things that we standards that we apply to, make sure all this is compliant, highlight where it's not, and get in, more personalized input. I think the challenge that I would see AI more struggling to, and I hope is on the insight side of things, the intelligence gathering side of things, or the human kind of research of what is important to people and what can be delivered that actually solves people's problems. That's hard to synthesize. I think you can shortcut some of the report writing or what have you, but the interaction with people, and to gather those insights of what is of value to people, I think that's going to be some harder to do. So it's synthesize, coming up, generating ideas, bringing them to a visual kind of onto a visual interface that you can select and go, yep, that ticks the box. Here it is, ready for coding. Or with these tools, I've been playing around with Cursor and Vercel, some of these other tools recently, and it spits out the code, and it's like I don't know the code well enough to go how good a code it is, but it certainly can, it's to a non-professional developer, someone with a bit of development experience but not professional. I kind of go, that's not bad. Certainly better than I could hand code myself. Then do you have a QA agent who looks over your stuff? And so is prototyping going to be something that you can actually fully code the thing and have it spit out rather than wireframe and a tool like a clickable prototype, if you like. You can really have the actual thing ready to go and test and see if it's successful. But yeah, I don't think anyone has a real clear answer, and I think a lot will also depend on how companies adopt this, and especially the companies that have a lot of compliance in their industries around it, that are naturally going to be more kind of, yes, we'd love to do this, but here's all the rules we have to follow, and if we break some of these rules, it's going to take only going to take a couple of scandals to set things back quite a significant way on the policy side of things, I would expect.
Yeah, and on that coding front one that you mentioned,
yeah,
I think I've got a bit of an opinion on this one, because I feel every organization that I've been to, I feel like I've never been to one where they've got the coding infrastructure in the perfect place, right? In such a good place that you've got APIs all over the place, or there's things like that are quite, there's areas they know they need to migrate, or there's things that they need to kind of do. I feel like it would be so, like, you almost have to start from the ground up to implement that AI to enhance those processes, right? I just don't feel like many large organizations are in a place yet to even start spinning up that code and then integrate it into their current architecture. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
I mean, I obviously don't have the depth of knowledge that you do in this area, but my instinct would be you're right, and legacy technology is such a problem in so many places. The tech and design overhead, that has to be dealt with is more of a problem. And that's the other question of, you implement, it allows you to a lot quickly theoretically, but it could allow you to a lot of rubbish quickly as well. And unless you've got a really well managed process, you can have a lot of pressure on one side going, we need to implement their stuff. And will the investment be at the controlling side to make sure it all fits together well and is, suitable for the longer term, and is adaptable to the, the ever increasing pace of change, because it's not there. We struggle with that, as you say, currently, let alone if the workflows get faster, if not, or exponentially faster.
Yeah, and do you think, Will, that maybe with we come back to designers, do you think
Mm.
that there are things or skills that designers should be building in order to stay relevant in this, new era that we find ourselves in and things we need to cover?
I think personally, I kind of think about what's the adjacent skills to design. Product development, QA, um, leadership. We'll probably touch upon this, but leadership is a skill that you have to keep working on. The historical tendency to kind of like, oh, pick the most senior person from the thing, and that's the leader. You know, you have to develop leaders, and traditionally, certainly in the UK, I don't think we've been particularly. I think this has been a long-term trend, not just across design, but across all industry management. There's not enough training to of managers. But going to to the adjacent skills thing, I think it doesn't hurt at all to learn a little bit of and it's learn it to not get into the whole I think I know more than I do danger. It's learn enough, not enough to be dangerous, learn enough to be respectful of actually what the skills are for a professional in this space. I mean, I think I was very fortunate in that Python got introduced to me by a couple of developers at when it was at Made, and they decided to run a little sideline event in the mornings, teaching people how to code and things. And I wanted to do a bit more. I'd done some HTML stuff way back in the day, CSS, what have you, but never proper programming as such. And this was a great little introduction to me. So I turned up at, the mornings they ran the session before the work started. I turned up, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for it at the start. I think we had about 25, nearly 30 people show up for the first class, and then it dwindled and it dwindled and it dwindled, and then there was about two of us. I think I was the only person who went and ended up going to all of the thing. But that was 7 years ago. And in the behind the scenes, I've been doing a little bit of Python programming, API development stuff in and amongst, my work over the years. Now, I'm not a professional developer in any way, shape, or form. I would never even consider myself, even doing this for, in bits for quite some time. But it helps you understand the process that's, what's going to happen with your designs. What are the implications of something that from a technical point of view? So, developing, skills along those sides. And I've been very lucky in that, you develop working relationships well with some of those adjacent skill people. And I've got some friends who are QAs who've given me insight into, the QA world. Again, not enough to do even a basic level professionally, but to understand the challenges they go through and the things to look out for. And I think those adjacent things, because as I say, if these AI tools really enhance themselves, what I think you might find is that if you've got one core strong suit of, say, design, you could end up with QA bots, development bots, that can take what you were good at and turn it into something that's publishable and testable. At the moment, you really often have to hire people with professional skill to get anything to a production of any complexity to a production level. And I think it may allow you to experiment and go, oh, I see the entire process. And I get some of the things that the developer people used to shake their heads at me when they saw my designs before. I now know they weren't as mean and spirited as my initial thought was, so it helps you develop that empathy. We've got I think as designers, we've got great empathy for customers, users, or what have you. We probably could do with developing more empathy generally as for the people we work alongside, and appreciate where they're coming from. And that extends itself to stakeholders as well, in the business. So yeah.
Yeah, and I like how you put that, Will, because I think if there's one question that I've done some mentoring in the past, and a
Mm.
lot of new designers, the big question they always ask is, do I need to learn how to code?
Yeah,
Should I learn a bit of development, right? Or some people
yeah,
tell me that I should be learning a bit of code as I'm doing it. But I think what you spoke about there was for the empathy, it's super important, right? It does
yeah,
help with that. Mm.
yeah. No, no, that's absolutely. And as you get more senior in the design, you realize your design skills, start to, even if you're developing more and more, you're developing on what's coming in new, that it doesn't necessarily, there's no, there, you get towards a peak, if you know what I mean. But in order to keep at that peak, you've got to keep learning what's new. But the areas that's going to make a big difference is working with others, your relationship building, your stakeholder management, all of these, your people skills, your leadership skills, your influencing skills, your listening skills in particular. All of these things are going to take you from the designer, your skill as a design expert, will hit a plateau if you don't develop these people skills. And that's what will take you to the next level, if you know what I mean. So you really got to work at those kind of things, and people skills hopefully aren't going out of fashion.
How do you like I guess kind of double down on those people skills, right? So,
Mm.
you want to become a exceptional leader,
Yeah,
hopefully. Um, where do you start? Now, I guess actually, let me ask a more specific question. How do you become more influential? Because I think that's probably one of the key
yeah,
things
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
people lack. And I've seen how you handle certain situations, and you know how you can manage like tricky stakeholders to
Yeah,
see see the light, so to speak. So yeah, how would you advise people to do that?
I think in terms of developing as a leader, um, you kind of, it's a little bit like um, how you would you know develop as a design. One, you look for people who can coach you, mentor you to a certain extent. You look for good examples and you just copy them to a thing. Reading, I probably read more leadership books in the last few years than I've read design books. In fact, I know I have. Um, you know, and you know, application with the stakeholder stuff. Um, it's getting exposure. It's I was very lucky at that Edward Jones company. In the UK office, I think we went from two or three people contributing to the thing we were building at the beginning to 36, 37 people regularly contributing to kind of the information system that we were building out of 100 people in the in the head office in the UK. So, you went from 3% to 36 to 40%, and, get out there, build relationships with people, and, to a certain extent networking, but I've never been a fan of that phrase networking. I always feel like it sounds very transactional, and I never been big with that, if you know what I mean. It's be an advocate, help people, um, you know, see where they're having trouble, help them, resolve the problem. Don't expect necessarily anything in return. I think that's always the thing with the strongest um, networks or things is don't set expectations of this is some kind of transact. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Um, it's just be useful to people, and I think over time people see that, and your reputation builds, and people come and seek you out to a certain extent. But it's that passion and advocacy and being an honest broker. Um, but all this comes from being willing to listen to people. That's listening is just such a fundamental skill at all levels of, the heart of empathy is understanding where people feel and observing, and, having a sense of pulling back your ego, seeing things from their other people's perspectives, um, and that tends to, it's building those human-centric behaviors and being someone people want to work with off the back of it, if you like. Those are the main things. So you push yourself out there. Don't shy away in your little design corner. Try to build relationships. Try to be an advocate. Try to be passionate. See things from other people's perspectives. Understand their problems. Work to solve their problems. And it builds upon things. What you end up being is, if you're lucky, you build a small group of advocates who are say the stuff for you, and that helps build the next wave of people who are in your tent, if you like, from improving things.
Yeah, and I think I like what you put there, Will, about making sure that we come out of our shells a little bit. That design ego that can creep in at times.
Yeah.
And the listening as well, right? I think that's also key. And I do feel that designers are overall good listeners, right? Because we have to listen to users. We do kind of go that research process. But do you feel that there's more of a challenge for designers with dealing with other egos in the organizations as well? Like, have you had to deal with a lot of egos as well in the past?
Yeah.
Managing that
At times. And I think this is the thing to distinguish. And it's something that I'd like to think, I've matured into. I think at the outset, it's very easy to go, this person's you can label a person, if you know what I mean. And I think what I've evolved to fundamentally look at, like, let's have a conversation. Let's find out what's going on. What's behind this? Because sometimes a position can be held that seems, strange or confrontational by someone. And actually, when you're able to build a little bit of, you talk to them, you understand where they're coming from, you understand what their incentives are, and you discover, that's why that is. Okay, maybe I can address that by another way, or that they haven't thought. They're holding a position because they think it's the only way to achieve X. If you don't know that's why they're doing it, it can, you can chip away at that thing that they're seemingly not willing to budge on a lot. But it's going to be very hard. It's going to get fractional, fractious. Sorry. If you can, I think I've solved a lot of more problems now by understanding people in the last few years, of people that I would 10, 15 years ago have labeled really awkward customers. Now, they have still had awkward customers, and you can get behind things and discover certain people are largely political animals, and they're the things they're caring about are not the things that are right for their business. They're the things that are right for them, purely on a selfish perspective, if you're but those are fewer and far between, relatively speaking. You do get them, but you try to go through that process of understanding where someone's coming from first, before and seeing how you can solve their problems without necessarily doing it in the way that is likely to involve, being directly confrontational with the position they're holding.
And have you had to balance that, Will, in the past? I'm sure you have. I know you probably have, but I guess for those listening, it'd be great to hear, how you balanced those, business teams or tricky stakeholders with the design process and trying to, get to an end goal.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of one example. I won't give the the company or the name of the people or what have you. So I'll keep it fairly thing. But I worked in an organization where we had one stakeholder who was pretty kind of opinionated, pretty kind of this is how the design should do things. I remember one meeting where he pulled three of us designers in with, I think, combined like 20, 30 years experience, and just like took literally the laptop out of one of the guy's hands and started drawing and saying, this is what I want. And that, and you get that, but it was like you have 30 years of experience sitting in front of you. Illustrate your problem. Don't show us what you think is the solution. Say, design this, or what have you. Now that's fairly common. But anyway, we had challenges with that stakeholder. But I ended up being pulled onto a little mini project that we went away from the office to a hotel with some of the senior people in HR, and there was a couple of us. We're showing this new process. They've got this challenge. How should we go about resolving it? So we met with 3 people with HR, and it was me, and the other person who turned up was this stakeholder. And I was like, oh no, you're joking me, because this is like, it's not, the stakeholder had expertise, at least in the area that we've been working on. He had done a bit there. This was like all new ground, but, because he was pushed into, was seen to be pushing this new thing, he was pulled into this and going, yeah, take this person or take this person. Like, anyway, so there was an initial conversation around what they're trying to achieve. And then this stakeholder launched into like 30, 40 minutes of, we could do this. And, and to your, point earlier, Warren, about the technical integration, he was saying, oh, pull in all this information from here. I knew that information didn't exist. There was no database with this information, that they could draw upon. You were having to, these little ideas that he coming up with. Like, okay, well, you need a new project for this, to do that bit, to draw in this, Anyway, so I let him speak for 35. I didn't say a word, just kept stum. Got to the end, and I think we only had about 10 minutes left in the session. And they said, okay, well, you've been very quiet. You haven't said anything. What are your thoughts? And I kind of, how do I put this? And I kind of said, well, a couple of things come to my mind. Firstly, there's this really good quote from, I think it's Einstein. It's attributed to, if I had to save the planet, I had an hour to save the planet, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes coming up with a solution. And then there's another one called by Da Vinci, which is something like simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. And this stakeholder just come up with this really sophisticated solution, sophisticated in the complex, drawing upon all these technical things that didn't exist. And fortunately, it was like 35 minutes. And 2 quotes from people that, inspirations that people recognize the name of. Once you say it's a couple of quotes from Einstein and Da Vinci, people are like, straight, they're eager. But it actually gave me the opportunity to go, okay, step back from this. Let's understand what the problem is. And I followed those quotations up with about 3 minutes of, this is the process we should go through. This is how we should engage with, how we should go about doing it. And unfortunately, that was the direction they took. Ballpark, it was one of my colleagues who picked up the project and ran with it after that. But that is probably a good example of a stakeholder, coming out of their thing, being very boisterous and, in an area, as I say, it was one thing that was when they used to talk like that, when it was an area that they knew fairly well, to go and do that in an area that was completely new to them without any kind of thing. I just thought, this is the difficult stakeholder that, you try and understand things from their perspective, but this may be a character.
Yeah. And, I think it's something that over the years, I've just I think everyone should, right? Is just accept that we are dealing with different people. I think you said it really well earlier, Will. It's that understand the motivations, understand the person, understand, why are they this way? Is there projects that they worked on in the past that have burnt them and people just haven't got what we're trying to go after? and it's that acceptance, right? Because I think you can get really frustrated if you don't accept that there will be these characters in
Yeah,
your,
yeah, yeah. But it's also important, I think, as I say too. I have buddies. Jay's been one of them at times down the years that I almost call my UX therapists, if you know what I mean. Friends who work in the industry that have been there and know exactly what, and then you can be on a project and talk about, oh my word, and you can say things there that enable you to then help you take that reflective kind of approach elsewhere, because you've got an outlet for your frustrations that, if you're not careful, might creep out in unproductive ways in the actual projects and situations.
No, definitely, definitely. I wanna touch on something now.
Hmm.
Around the I want to get your thoughts on like the future of user experience and design,
Yep.
and the reason why like I'm particularly keen to get your thoughts because when we first met in what, like 2015, like
Yep.
you were embarking on a master's in AI, and so I'm pretty confident that you've got a good grasp on what might be next in the future,
Well,
because you saw that before anyone else. I think my first AI
no,
project was
well,
like three years later, and now it's just all over the place. So I think you're a little bit ahead of the game there.
well. The thing is, I wish I'd say at that stage I followed through, because that was my intention. Was at that time was to go and study a master's in AI and move to Germany and do that there. And that, as I say, that was about, I was doing night classes in German and stuff like that. Um, but circumstances happened, and met someone, my current partner, and ended up staying in the UK, not doing that, and so I never actually did ended up studying the AI, but it's something, as I say, I followed for quite some time.
What
And
you knew there
well,
was
I
something
did.
in it.
I
There was
I
something
I
calling you.
I'm not going to claim I'm new. And the thing is, it's like a stop clock, if you know what I mean. It was going to be come along at some stage, and I think realistically, what I thought was at the time, which part of the thing was, um, I could kind of see what it's literally happening now, but I didn't know when it was going to happen. It's taken 10 years. I probably would have you know, been there 3-4 years too early. And you can be too early. That's the thing. It's if you're there before everyone, it's all very good to say you were visionary and got there, but you can be. It's also a matter of timing, if you know what I mean. But I did see a situation whereby AI could come in and be a disruptive technology and a destructive thing in society. And I did feel there's a really good book. I think it's called AI 2041. It's like 10 stories. It's a combination between a novelist and a futurologist, I think. And it's got 10 stories of what the future could be like in 2041. And you're seeing little bits of some of these things across all sorts of bits of society or industry now. And I felt like there could be a large scale kind of cut into jobs. Jobs could change, and maybe at some stage having expertise in AI and design might put me at an advantage. Both in that, but it was something AI I've always been interested in for a long time. But I have studied it, but not. I never did the masters or anything like that. I did lots of little courses, reading, and so forth. And there's also AI it's a very big, broad topic, if you know what I mean. There's a lot to it, so it kind of gets AI. It's an amorphous thing. So there's a lot of things that you could have studied in it. You could have focused on it, and it could be much less relevant than as a skill than it might you might have got lucky, but you might have got unlucky in how you studied it. So, but in terms of how things are going to develop, I think it's difficult. I think it will be disruptive. I think just for, our industry or a lot of industries, there's going to be a lot of upheaval. I think there's going to be time frames where companies are nervous about hiring or think they may overhire, given what the AI might be able to do. And there may be massive needs for people to be retraining quite frequently. I mean, I can see that being something whereby you've got to refresh your skill set frequently. And, I've had some time out to reflect in this last few months and so forth. And it has given me the opportunity to engage with some of these tools. It's something that in my last company I tried to push, but, giving a lot of companies struggle to give people the space to explore this and invest the time required to understand the technology, understand how it can be brought into the processes and to be exploitable, to then be competitive, in the years to come. And I think the companies that will have, to a certain extent, given certain space to their employees to start engaging with this on tangible processes. What's your process today? What could this look like? What aspects of these can be enhanced by use of a tool? And what's the speed relatively? And, when you're pitching at sales and you're saying, okay, we can produce this app, this website, it involves database integration. It involves, previously you might have said, been working on man days and said, right, that's 2 designers for 80 days on this or what have you. You can look at those same process and go, okay, can you bring it down to 30 days? Can you do it down to 15 days in certain things? And then suddenly, what you previously went to a client to build a website or an app at 100,000, 60,000, 200, $250,000, depending on the complexity of it, you're suddenly looking at 10,000, 15,000, and you're turning them around every 3 weeks. Now the question is then, is there going to be enough clients to keep the scale of workforce in place that you previously had? Or does that also open up opportunities for companies to go, do you know what? Previously it was going to cost us $250,000 to build this thing to I think it's a business idea. We can build it. Now we can do it potentially for 15,000. Let's go 6. We've got 5, 6 ideas of these. Let's do them all. And it's still cheaper than the one. So, maybe the drop off won't be as much, but I mean, I think, I don't think anyone's got gonna be in a position to say this is what's going to happen. But I think companies that try to see what can be done with the technology and start to try and bring it into their competitive aspect of their process, they'll have that advantage. And those that don't make that investment and for whatever reason say we can't afford this right now, which I empathize with, but it might be a case of you can't afford not to do it. What's the cost? Because you may not have a business in 3, 4 years, 5 years without it. So yeah.
I've got one last question.
Yep, sure.
It's probably just more of a reframing of the last question.
Okay, go.
But you was ahead of the wave, right? In just thinking about AI, just thinking about it. So
right.
If you could encourage listeners to embark on a master's degree right now, or do further learning on a topic right now, what is your gut? What is your gut telling you? I mean, I'm projecting you as like a Nostradamus kind of figure right now.
Yeah, that's dangerous. That's very dangerous.
But it's good to have it on record if you're right,
Do you know, I might take the cheat way out slightly and say,
ask ChatGPT.
No, that would really be a cheat. But I do like the kind of irony of that. ChatGPT, how can I protect myself from ChatGPT? by the way, there's privacy in place, isn't there? This I don't want to ask myself how to be, but no, I think investing in your own ability to be adaptable and willing to learn, because I don't think necessarily there's one skill that you could say, oh, if you do this, I mean, you could argue in the next few years, anything to do with data and algorithms, if you had the expertise in that, you might find yourself. But one, it takes a long time, to get a formal thing in that. There's going to be a lot of people chasing it, and it might be one of those gold rushes, if you know what I mean. And by the time you get there, it's actually the land's been mined. So this is why I think it's having an open mindset, and this is where designers, I think, and research-focused designers have a particular advantage, is that curiosity, willingness to keep learning, adaptability, learn enough to understand how things work as a system, if you like. That's systems thinking, critical thinking. Emotional intelligence, I don't think is going away as a valuable thing to have, and to be able to draw upon. But yeah, that I think realistically that's the thing, and savings, because I do think, ironically, it's going to be a case of, and whether the governments are going to be quick enough to do this, but put in place programs for when people are laid off en masse. I historically come from an area where old school industry, where the industry died out, and 50 years later there still wasn't really sufficient programs put in place to retrain people and things like this. So I think you're going to have to rely a little bit on your own. People are going to have to rely on their own kind of themselves for quite some time before the government might come in and go, right, we're going to need to do something whereby if people are laid off en masse, we're going to look at retraining programs for people, educating them to go into something new. And that might be the future, is frequent retraining and frequent learning, and being open to that, and not going, to a certain extent, this is my only identity. If I don't do this, I can't do anything else. So yeah, I think that may be my slightly cheat answer, is work on the attitude and approach to this rather than a particular skill. I mean, as I said, I've been learning a little bit of Python programming to learn on some of the stuff on the data side for quite some time. That's something that I think doesn't hurt me at all. But whether I end up doing anything professionally with that, I don't know. It's not even something I put really typically on my CV at the moment.
I definitely know. Very interesting insights, and actually, Python is the king of code at the moment, I believe. It's definitely foundational.
Yeah,
you never know, everything that you said, the retraining programs, all that kind of stuff. Maybe AI will be that accelerant to kind of help people en masse pick up new skills as well. So
yeah.
very interesting insights. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. It's so unfortunate that we've run out of time, because the time just flies every single time.
Yeah, the time has flown. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Absolutely incredible. We've dipped into so many different topics and so many golden nuggets. Been writing notes along the way, and definitely retaining a lot of stuff that I can apply into my day-to-day work, and as I'm sure a lot of people listening will be able to do the same as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Will. And for
thanks very much, guys. Warren, Jay, it's been a pleasure, and you've had so many great guests on here so far. I feel privileged to be asked to contribute what little thoughts the thoughts I have. So I really appreciate that, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And just before we kind of wrap up, where can people find you? Like if they want to get in touch for, just a conversation or.
Yeah. I think LinkedIn is probably the best. Not necessarily best for a lot of things, but for getting hold of me professionally, I'm on LinkedIn. Will Thomas there, and you might get me from through my former employees, Chief Flights Momondo, Infinum, Maid, or what have you. Feel free to reach out there and start a conversation. Happy to engage with anyone on any particular topic. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from people.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Thanks so much, Will.
Thanks, Will.
No worries. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Bye.